Thank you for joining us today for this Small Business Saturday webinar as part of the digital tour with the wonderful Adam Bastock, who is here with us today to talk to us all about how to achieve small business sustainability through local collaboration. I am Anna from the Small Business Saturday team. Please do pop in the chat where you're dialing in from. Say hi. Hi, Anwyn. Hello from North Wales. I bet it's cold there today. Maybe not as cold as it is in Glasgow, where Adam currently is, -3, I hear.
Yeah, it's
Um,
a
yeah.
crisp start to the morning, I have to say.
Susan's in Edinburgh, so
Yeah, yeah.
also very chilly. Thanks, guys. Do pop in the chat where you're dialing in from. Lovely to see you virtually this morning. I hope you've got a cup of tea or a coffee ready for this wonderful webinar. Just a reminder that this is being recorded, so you can watch it again if you want, or maybe you're watching on repeat right now. So just a reminder that if you miss anything, you will get the recording of this afterwards. So don't worry about that. And just a massive thank you to BT Digital Skills for supporting the Small Business Saturday digital tour. Please do go and check out all of the wonderful resources they have for small businesses on the website. And just a reminder, actually, and some of you were probably well aware of this, that if you watch 10 of these webinars live as part of the Small Business Saturday digital tour, you will get a free gift from us just in time for Christmas, from Small Business, of course. So thank you for popping in the chat where you're coming in from. Lovely to see. There's lots of people up in Scotland
Let's
today,
say.
actually, a few, and Wales and Northern Ireland. We're all over the United Kingdom today, which I love. So anyway, I'll pass over to Adam and yeah, enjoy the webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna. Yeah, nice to see some other people in Glasgow here. So, yeah, it's very good to get started. Enjoying the sudden crisp spell that has hit us. Sadly, it's not sunny here, but we'll get going. So, for anyone who's not been on seen me before on some of these, my name is Adam Bastock. I run a company called Small 99, and we do several things. One of which is run a series of events called People Planet Pint, which I'll be talking more about. We also run People Planet Pastry. This is me with a picture of a cardboard cutout of me, which I wish I should take to all events, so I can prop it in the corner when networking gets too much for me, which is quite often. What we do and what we've been doing over the past few years is we've trained probably around 3,000 businesses. Some of that's been with Small Business Britain as well as other organisations around sustainability. So very broad brush. We've done a lot of training on like how to find your carbon footprint, how to build a reduction plan, what is net zero, really technical stuff, all the way down to the small elements. That's been a consulting with businesses as well as that bigger piece. And we do a lot of workshops and talks like this. So what I want to do today, as well as talk about People Planet Pint, is really go through in terms of that sustainability for small businesses, discuss with you what we've learned. So over the past 3 years, it's been a real roller coaster, both good and bad, as any small business is, in terms of what we learned from that journey. We're going to be talking about what works and what doesn't. So what have we found from that process? And then also giving you some really practical small tips for things that you can do to start. Please do. I've got the chat open, so please do pop any questions in the chat. I'll try to come to those as we go through. I want this to be quite an interactive session where possible and can answer. And yeah, any questions? If not, we'll come to the end. Come towards the end. So we do run the biggest sustainability meetup in the UK. So we run around 80 events a month across the UK as well as into Europe. So the idea behind them really is to bring small businesses together into a space that they feel comfortable in, which is typically the pub or the cafe, where it's a local community event. And rather than you having to go to a big conference or a big talk or anything like that, you can meet other like-minded people like yourself in the pub to learn about sustainability. This has been the most successful thing that we have done over the past 3 years. I've done a lot of training, a lot of workshops, and trying to get people into classrooms to listen to me talk at them for several hours. And unsurprisingly, that has not worked quite as well as going, shall we just go to the pub and you can talk to each other instead? Some really important learnings there, which I'll come back to throughout this and why I want to share in terms of how you become a more sustainable business and how you influence people locally. There's some key learnings in here that may seem very informal and very small, but are really important. The old message we used to put out was that we enable small businesses to grow a more profitable business through carbon reduction, which fundamentally is true. That is something that you can do, and I don't want to lose that track here. That if you reduce your carbon emissions, there are many ways that that will benefit you financially, both directly and indirectly. However, we found that this message was really hard for people to to grasp and to believe and to feel like was really emotionally linked to them. And so some of the ways that we did that carbon reduction, just to kind of build that picture up, is that we built a carbon footprinting tool. So this is still live on the website. You can go online, and if you want to get your carbon footprint, you answer 10, 15 different questions about what it is your business does, and then we give you an estimate. So you don't need to collect any data. You can just get a very quick, easy, free carbon assessment for what your footprint looks like. We also started out by building a Small 99 hero platform where we took all the different actions that you can take as an organization into small chunks and put those into a free resource where if you're just wondering what could I do next, there's a list of actions you can take. However, I'll come back to the reasons why we're moving away from this model soon. The other things that we do, yes, Emily, I will put a link into the chat later once I found it because I don't have it to hand directly now. Um, we also run a lot of workshops. So we bring people together around a table. You can see that photo on the left here. That was in, I think it was in Leeds, where we just got people to come together, sit around the table and discuss the actions they're taking. And we use that the way we did that was by building games and these really interactive materials that are not tech focused. They're very tactile, they're very in person, very low tech to try and facilitate those conversations. And this is what we really found worked was actually bringing those people into the room. The things that didn't work for us were around the carbon reduction and the focus on that because businesses ultimately do care about growth and profit and paying the bills and paying staff at the end of the month and paying your rent, whatever it is. Sustainability is a really big topic that people are concerned about, but it is very rarely the acute and urgent need that people have. And I think what we've really learned over the past 3 years is that the industry isn't moving in the way that we thought it would do. So we're doing a lot of reflection at the minute of actually what has worked over the past 3 years. We've had really good feedback and people who have come to our workshops really enjoy them. However, getting that kind of traction can be quite difficult. So the way that the industry was meant to move, it hasn't, and there's no real single reason for that. So we launched 2021. I would say that the first 2 years of that was a very different market to it has been in the past 18 months since then. And I think that's where we've seen these changes really come through. That change has been very rapid, and I think we placed ourselves slightly incorrectly within that. And I won't go too much into that as to a reflection of why, but we're seeing multiple things. So geopolitical issues, we're seeing local budgets within businesses, but also from like local elections. We do a lot of work with councils that are funding that decarbonisation activity locally. That has shifted for again various different geopolitical reasons. There's no single thing here, and again, this is the issue that we found is that the benefits are real, but they're really intangible. So while people and we can do the kind of the studies and we can talk to people about how cutting your emissions is going to save you energy bills, and we'll come on to some examples of that later and how that's going to save you money. While that is logically true, it's not necessarily emotionally believed or not emotionally true, but people don't necessarily feel and believe it. So what I want to talk to you through today in this session is some practical ways that you can support each other and how we've seen that happen and how we've seen that materialize over the past few years. We're also going to look at how those community events that we're running are really sparking those local partnerships and that commercial opportunity that can be had from sustainability. But also we're going to look at some quick wins for collective environmental impact. So I think this is really the story that we want to try and get across is that as a small business, you are in a very powerful position to work with other people like you in your area to have an impact that is bigger than the sum of its parts. Small businesses are fantastic at being able to just collaborate really quickly and speak to each other and build that local network and that local community, but often overlook that as as being an environmental action that you can take. So I want to talk more about that. So this is why the kind of the first action that I'm going to recommend you do is actually start talking to each other. Already we've got a bunch of people in the chat. There's 85 different businesses who are on this call at the minute, all of whom will have various different experiences and skill sets that you can use. But it's very rare that we actually kind of it's very rare that kind of space is seen as the action here. Collaboration is really key here, and this is the main thing that we've learned from running these People Planet Pint events. So this is a photo you can see of one of the meetups we're in Glasgow back when it was a lot warmer and we would be on the rooftop. we've had people find jobs, we've had people work together and start, win sales from each other in terms of a very soft sense. And it's not networking, it is a meetup, but people naturally start to build and collaborate and work with each other as a result of that. We've had people come along and change their entire career as a result of this, all through meeting different people at these events and speaking to other small businesses like them. We typically attract small businesses. Large companies don't tend to come to these events. They're typically at the conferences and at the larger, more formal training, but we do attract a large network and audience here of those SMEs in local communities who are working together. The challenge here is that a lot of this only really works if people know what's going on, and therefore it requires you to talk to each other and talk to those businesses near you. I mean this in the critical sense of this is not just people in your village, but it is almost in your postcode as well. And something we're really trying to drive towards is postcode level action as what is working. Um, this is the reason for that, I think, is because even in Glasgow, where I'm based, what's going on the other side of the city, I don't really know those businesses. I don't know what's going on there. They're 2 or 3 miles away from me, and I'm not seeing them on a daily basis. And it's really important to actually look at the businesses that I care about and the ones that I have to speaking as a purchaser or as a customer. The ones that I have an emotional relationship with are the ones that I walk past every day. The ones that I see, whether they're open or closed, whether they're busy or quiet, whether they're having a sale or whether they're doing an event or not. And I think that's where the power is it's connecting with those businesses and having that conversation because ultimately people care about what they see on a daily basis. They're not necessarily going to care about a case study of a company that's the other side of the city. So going to these events, building that relationship that's within your immediate local vicinity is so powerful at being able to collaborate. And we're going to come on to some action examples later for that. But one of which would be talk to your supply chain. Your suppliers are typically other businesses in areas, they're also in their local organization. And it's the one thing that from a lot of the workshops and training we've done that people often overlook and don't necessarily actually speak to. And it's the biggest potential opportunity for cost savings and for that collaboration to really work. I'm going to come to some questions in the chat. So Olga asks, are the people who are coming to the meetups mainly very young? No, I would say Glasgow, this is a unique instance where the kind of the photos are slightly younger. The meetups that we run, we have a very wide demographic. So we have quite a lot of people who are retired, who are at the end of their careers or at the end of their sort of sustainability journey, who are then trying to hand over their actions and their sort of guidance and information over to other people. It's a really diverse kind of level. Yes, a public transport is a massive pain. I think that's always the issue. We do try and run our events near train stations as a result of that. Yes, Samantha. So I'm going to drop a link into the chat and not just send it to Anna, which is what I normally do on these things. So there is a map there, and then if you zoom into the map, that will then open up. If you want a link of where all the meetings are happening, just look on the Eventbrite because then that will actually that has all the links. So yeah, I think this is what we're really seeing is actually the power of the event is people coming to these things. And an example of that in Glasgow is egg lighting. Egg lighting are fantastic. They've been going for many years. They're a real circular economy leader. So yeah, don't take my entire word for this, but very roughly what they do is they do lighting as a service. So an example would be rather than you going into a warehouse and buying an entire row of LED panels, they would you would kind of lease them from egg lighting, and they would come and service them and make sure that they are operating as efficiently as possible, which means that your operating costs are typically much lower over the lifetime of that lighting, rather than it being a upfront sort of capex spend. The benefit of this is that we had someone come along to the events. They've been speaking to a lot of people at People Planet Pint and got some ideas of what they could do. They took that away and they actually joined something called Step Up to Net Zero, which is a program happening in Glasgow where it's a funded placement for decarbonisation support. But they started speaking to their supply chain. So they actually started speaking to, at first, the actual packaging team. So went down to the shop floor or the factory floor and started talking to the team, going, what really annoys you? What's your biggest frustration? And they were like, well, we spend so much time collecting up all this packaging waste and it's just slowing us down. We've got all this cardboard or whatever it is everywhere. And it's just a real pain. That time that was spent using those handling materials also cost money to dispose of. So if you've got a lot of waste, you normally have to pay someone to get rid of that. So that might be the local council, that might be a waste management provider, but even if it's taking up time, that is also money to process, but you're also going to have a fee at the end there. So what they ended up doing was going, well, we've got all of this packaging stuff. Where's it coming from? First question. Well, it's being sent to us by our suppliers. Why are we not doing more with that? Can we not just send it back or work with them in some way to try and reduce down this frustration? And that's exactly what happened. So all that package they were throwing away, once they picked up the phone and spoke to their suppliers, were like, well, actually, yeah, no, we can reuse that. That's really useful. It's costing us loads of money as well because we're having to buy in all this packaging all the time. And so it was going, from the supplier to egg, and then it was being disposed of. Where ideally, well, why not just send it back to the top so it can be reused and create that circular loop rather than it being recycled and exiting the system and having to pay for it. So there's several cost savings there. One for the supplier, and they're getting materials back. They're not having to buy new anymore. But also the cost saving is that the egg aren't necessarily then having to spend money saving sending that material to the recycling plant or to the waste management provider is the word I was looking for, but forgot to do it. This is just one example. There are loads of businesses out there like this and loads of stories like this of like cafes that are doing this with their coffee ground waste and things like that, where you just don't necessarily need to be throwing things away. Where can you reuse that, or where you kind of cut that loop? So that take back scheme that was then reused by suppliers saved everyone money in that supply chain. And I think it's a really good example where this was not necessarily this was driven by a sustainability person, but the problem that it actually solved was a real frustration point for the person in the team or for the team on the factory floor who were just really fed up of having all this packaging they were dealing with. They're not necessarily going to know the carbon footprint of that, nor is that going to be inspiring nor motivational to them. But through that efficiency process of looking at the sustainability, it saved money. And I think that's the really important part of this. But that's not necessarily how you'd approach it with a factory floor to go, we're doing a sustainability thing. You're going, actually, we're here to solve your problems. How can we help you? Just some other examples of this. I'm going to touch on these very loosely, and if there's any challenges that people do have, please do put them in the chat, and we can try to do some sort of live agony aunt style questions later. But I'm going to touch on some very broad themes loosely. Energy is a really big one at the minute, and I don't need to tell anybody that energy prices are very expensive at the minute in the UK. This is happening across the supply chain. Everyone's challenging this. So cash is carbon in this sense, in that carbon emissions are being created somewhere, and anything that you make. So if you're making that cardboard, even though it's recyclable, the factory needs to power itself to make that cardboard, and therefore that supply chain has that waste. If they don't need to make that cardboard anymore because you can reuse what's being made, they're going to save money on their energy bills because they're not having to create that cardboard again. So this is really about thinking where in your supply chain is perhaps that energy being created. That's a cost that's going to be impacting your bottom line, and therefore that energy that's being used somewhere needs to be cut down or reduced. And that's where sustainability is really powerful, in that if you can work with people to not need to create as much energy in the first place, that's going to help save everybody money and hopefully push back and push down to you as well in terms of those maybe not reduce costs, but they might not go up as much as they would do otherwise. Another example of this is transport, right? If you've got a pallet of beers like this, they're going to be very heavy, and to move those any distance at all is going to need fuel. It's a basic physics thing. The heavier the object is, the more energy it takes to move it, and therefore, the more things that you're moving around, the heavier it's going to be. So if we keep with that packaging context, that's going to be things like if you're individually wrapping every beer can in this stack in like cardboard, that's going to take up more space, and it's going to take up more weight, and that's going to take more fuel to move, and that's going to take more carbon emissions to move as well. So how do you cut these down to really make it much more efficient, and just be aware of anything that you're sending out or that you're receiving, where can that be cut down? That's just on the packaging side, but also thinking slightly bigger at this is how do you group these deliveries together? And this is where the talking to other businesses in your area is really key. If you can speak to small businesses that are on your industrial estate or that are your neighbors in your co-working space or whatever it might be, can you start to group those deliveries together for things that you're throwing out? Or things, sorry, for where you're sending those items, not throwing out. So if you're sending them in the same direction, can you actually just kind of bundle those deliveries and work together with other potentially competitors in your space to cut those costs? In terms of a more personal or staff-based one, car shares are really big. It was another company based in Glasgow who realized recently that it's only when they did a little bit of a travel survey that they found about 10 members of their staff all lived in the same place and were all driving in independently every morning. And that's 10 cars that are on the road creating traffic. And they were like, well, if only two of you car share, that might only be then like 6 or 7 cars that are coming in every day. And that just cuts down the amount of time and need for that. So I think car sharing can be quite difficult and can be a bit of a barrier. Not everyone wants to share their car or be forced to talk to other people in the morning necessarily. However, it can be one where if you think of 10 people all driving to work, that's 10 people all using petrol. That petrol is costing them money, and therefore that could save them cash if they all shared and didn't drive their individual cars in all the time. Ideally, they'll be electric. Even if they're electric, they still cost money, but there's still physics there, right? You still need a fuel to move those cars. Electric is much more efficient. However, it's still going to cost them money there. I think car clubs as well, I'm speaking more from a personal point of view here, are a really good one where it's less about needing to own a car, but more having access to one. I'm quite lucky where I live in Glasgow, there's a lot of car clubs near us. And what I mean by that is there are cars on the street that I can walk up to. I've got basically a credit card size device that I put on the windscreen on a little reader. And then if I've pre-booked the car, that will then unlock. I get in, drive off, return it back to that bay, get out, lock it up again, and walk home. So we use these every couple of weeks. They're quite cheap. It's about £7 an hour, I think. That includes the fuel, and I don't need to own the car. So it's a kind of car on demand service where I don't need to have a car sat outside that I own and I'm liable for that will be sat there, 5 out of 7 days at least, not being used and is just a wasted asset that's depreciating. Whereas a car club, I can use the car when I need it and it's on demand. That only works because there are a lot of them near me and therefore it's really handy, but it is a much better way of doing that. And then obviously installing EV charging as well. It can be a really good profit generator. And we saw an example recently of a hotel chain. I say chain like a micro chain that had a couple of sites locally. They installed EV charging at their premises, and that paid back in about 2 years, I think it was, because what they saw was a lot of people were driving to the EV charging and then coming into the hotel to grab a coffee and a bit of cake while they waited for their car to charge for half an hour or whatever it was. So it's not just about the infrastructure of like an EV charger. It's also about what behavior change does that instill, and that can be two things. As I say, that might be people using it as destination charging, where they're coming to you, they're getting out the car, then they're coming to spend money with your business, or it might be that they are then um, you're simply charging them for that. And so on some industrial estates, we've seen it where you might install an EV charger and then open that out to public on evenings and weekends, especially if you're near a local park or something like that, where people want to charge their car. There might not be EV charging at the actual car park at the recreational park itself. If they can park nearby, you as a business can then charge money for the public using that charger when it's not being used by your own staff. So there are those knock-on effects and benefits there as well. I'm just going to check the chat very quickly for any questions. Some great ideas here. Uh, 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 uh. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, okay, as you say, London roads are jam-packed with cars. Something must be done to relieve their very heavy congestion. Exactly. The answer there can't be just add more cars to this. We need alternatives. That's where car clubs are really useful because typically that does free up a lot of space. I think there was a stat from a few years ago on one of the reports they did that for every car club they were putting in, that was removing 18 private vehicles from the local area because of people shifting their behavior where they went, I don't need to have a car that's sat there and only being used a few hours a week. I'll just hire a car on demand when I need it. It's a bit chicken and egg, but it is really impactful. We've talked about waste quite a lot already, but I think it's really important to look at this. And I've chosen this photo from Unsplash specifically because I think it is about grouping waste collections. It's quite often you might have a lot of stuff that's sat in your cupboard that can either be sent to be refurbished or reused or to like a tool library or something like that. But I do think it's also about just grouping those waste collections. So you start to see economies of scale here. And if you are in like a co-working space or it's not the right word for it, but like an office block where maybe you've got 10 businesses that are all generating cardboard waste, you might then have 10 different businesses paying 10 different, or in some cases paying the same waste collection provider, waste management provider to come and collect that cardboard. The question really is, who else is near you that's throwing away the same things? Can you group together, and especially if you're on the same site, get everybody just to club together and switch to a single provider and have that sort of group contract, that bulk buying contract, which normally means you get a better price. So then everyone's going to be throwing away less. People might be reusing more of that stuff, and you can save money by just switching and grouping together. But as I came to earlier, that only works if you're talking to each other. You need to know your neighbors and actually have those conversations to work those out and see those opportunities. So yeah, do try and speak to other businesses and get those bulk discounts. But as mentioned as well, it's also about just raising awareness of like what you're throwing away. And this is something that we've seen in the workshops and the training that we've done over the past few years. People often don't have visibility over it. So start with a waste audit. That sounds technical and quite boring, but sometimes it is a case of just going through and looking at what is being thrown out and what's being generated there. So for example, there are some companies that I spoke to that did a they spent a week and then they just emptied out like a lot of their they did it like fairly hygienically, but they emptied out a lot of the bins to work out what was being thrown out, and they found just a huge amount of it was single-use water bottles or coffee cups. So it was all just drinks that people were buying from the cafe on site or nearby and throwing away. And they were like, "Well, can we try and get our staff to use reusable cups or switch to like put in like a drinks like a water fountain or something in the premises to try and reduce that down because staff members coming in with disposable coffee cups that they're using once and throwing away is costing the business money in waste management collection. So the more they can cut that down and drive that behavior shift can actually save them money overall. I also wanted to talk about water, mostly because I think we're in a period of we're going into winter now where it is going to be very wet. We've already seen some devastation in Monmouth in South Wales where they got really impacted by these heavy floods. And there's this photos from York from several years ago where you know that water had got too close to the pub. Um, and there's several options here, and I think water is one that gets overlooked in the sustainability space quite a lot, but it is, especially if you're in England, incredibly expensive, and it is a resource that is going to only ever get more expensive for various reasons. But if you're on the southeast, it's going to get a lot drier. By 2030, it's expected that there'll be 20% less rainfall during the summer months, and that means that water will become a much more scarce resource. There are several things you can do here. So SUDS, which stands for Sustainable Urban Drainage System, um, really helps you retain water on the site and release it into the local area much more slowly. And that can help protect, especially if you've got a bigger site, against flooding. So if you've got a lot of like really dry land or a car park that's just got tarmac on it, that is going to be ripe for flash flooding because the water has nowhere to go. So it will sit on that surface and then just run off into wherever it can go. If you've got a sustainable urban drainage system or a SUDS, that often means that that car park might be able to absorb quite a lot of that water, and you probably want to search for it to get some photos of. I should have probably pulled up some better images of this, but it's where you might have like a lot of moss or like a lot of reed beds or a pond or something on site where the water can go there and will be absorbed by nature effectively and sit within that. That's going to really help against flooding. This is especially if you've got a site that might be liable to flash flooding. This is going to be an insurance risk, and therefore is your stock at threat of being damaged because that flash flood might come into your premises. I do think this is more likely in winter because we're seeing that heavier rainfall, but also as you go into summer, when the ground's really dry and there's nowhere for that water to run off, really dry land is terrible for water and it will just won't absorb. It will just run straight out as if it's on tarmac. So it's a bit of both. Rainwater harvesting is a really important one as well because it helps you cut those costs. If you're taking a hose pipe and washing your vans or your bikes, as someone has put in the chat, with kind of drinking water, that seems quite wasteful when you start thinking of it in a different way, and that is going to cost you a fair bit of money. You don't necessarily need to clean your vans with um, virgin drinking water, capture rainwater and use that instead. You can't integrating rainwater can be more dangerous. So if you are looking to do more with this, then make sure you've got the right systems in place. It's not just about installing water butts and using that for everything, unless you are only using it for certain applications. But like if you are just watering plants or you're watering or cleaning vans with it, there's no reason why that can't just be a water butt that's sat in the garden or in the car park or whatever it might be. And finally, and this might be the place to start really, start tracking your water usage of actually how much are you spending on water each month. This often isn't considered, and we speak a lot about energy costs and energy emissions. Rarely do we talk about the cost that you might be spending on water, which is a big part of this. What I wanted to talk about now a little bit was how that community event and how we've seen community events really sparking these actions. And that we've done a lot of presentations like this where I can stand in the front of a room and talk about all the different solutions. In the hero application, we've got about 150 like different actions you can take. The cards that we've done are about 100. The ideas are out there. We don't need new ideas. It is more about how do we get people to understand these. And quite often, me doing presentations like this aren't the way that those ideas get communicated or actioned. It is through local partnerships, local collaboration events that works. And this is where I think it's really about conversation, not education. And one of my biggest bugbears over the past few years has been in the sustainability movement, seeing a lot of people say, well, we just need more education. It's just more people knew about climate change and the risks it poses, then we'll be able to solve that. At this time of year, we are at COP30. There have been 30 years of that education and that policy discussion. Clearly, that's not been working as effectively as it should do. I think what we actually need to be doing is getting a lot more people talking about this and understanding what they can do in the local area and collaborating with people, and or maybe not, but just raising awareness and having those discussions can lead to some really unexpected impacts. Again, I've just realized another screenshot that I should have used on this slide deck, which I completely forgotten to do. But there's someone that messaged me the other day saying that they've now started a brand new company that does energy efficiency for small businesses using solar and trying to really educate people on where they can make the savings because they met somebody else at a People Planet Pint event. That's a whole new idea they came to because they realized that having spoken to a lot of people in their local pub, that they're all struggling and weren't aware of the solutions that were out there to reduce their energy bills down. So that's what they're now doing as a whole new business. So the opportunities from just talking to people is much higher, I think, than just education. And presentations like this have their place and they're really useful and really great at getting out to a lot of people. But what we're seeing in terms of translating that into actual on the ground action is by getting people around a table in a workshop or in a pub to chat about that, or in a cafe as well, to discuss this. We've seen much more impact through our networking events than we have with the training that we do. Is the honest sort of slightly annoying answer to it is that we spent years developing really high impact, really complicated, really validated training sessions, and it turns out all we needed to do was get people into the pub to chat about stuff. There's a great quote from this here. So yeah, one person went to the pub, got a new job. Um, One person went on to hold a clothes swap, which saved nearly 800 items from landfill. And then there's a load of case studies that were shared of like local impacts. And I think this is where the local comes in, is that I can tell you about case studies of businesses in Glasgow that are doing great things. If you're not based in Glasgow, you probably don't care that much. You want it, or at least not as much as if you heard about one that was where you are in your local community. Because as I said at the start, you're walking past them every day, and you're going to have that emotional connection with them. I think also what we see a lot of is that shift into new jobs. So people who are meeting locally are much more likely to find those new jobs and new opportunities because they're going to start understanding what's out there, and it often is who you know to understand those opportunities. And it is a little bit like, is it like a lottery? You've got to be in the game you've got to be in it to win it. If you're not having these conversations, you're not going to see the opportunities, you're not going to see the benefits, you're not going to see the chances that you could have to improve things. So it really is about having these conversations. In fact, just yesterday, one of the other things that I've not included here is that we do also run wine tastings around climate. Um, and someone came up to me, they'd been to a People Planet Pint about 3 years ago, and the corporate that they were working at, they got that job because they met someone and moved into that sustainability training from the event they went to in London 3 years ago. And I was like, this is the perfect circling of that loop of impact. I think the other thing that is very common in the sustainability sort of approach or movement is that People want tools, they want dashboards, they want data, they want to feel like it's all really validated, but that often becomes really overwhelming. And something that we've seen is a lot of those requests for data and reporting just sit in inboxes or they sit in drawers and no one looks at them, no one cares. The reason for that is it's yet another thing to do. If you went to that shop floor, so using egg lighting as an example, and asked them to start collecting data on how much they're throwing out, they're probably going to push back and be like, I'm too busy, I've got other stuff to do, because you're not solving a problem, you're adding to their to-do list. Whereas if you approach them and say, what's your biggest frustration? And then they say, well, we're throwing away all this, we're bogged down in all this packaging we're having to process all the time. You go, well, okay, let's try and do something about that. Let's try and remove that. That's a solution. That's not an additional problem. Something else we've seen all the time is that sustainability teams and financial teams very rarely talk to each other. I'm very aware that we are mostly a small business audience, so you might not have those two different people, and you may be the same person. Certainly is the case in my mind. But it's thinking about these attitudes in similar ways, and that often that sustainability and financial are more linked than you would expect, and we see that in businesses. We see that in teams that have got 10,000 people. It is the common across the scale, and often the challenges that you're facing are also present in much bigger businesses. And I think the other issue we see is a lot of that one-off training course creates a short bump of interest, but it doesn't have that consistent momentum. Is a very good reason why we require any of our volunteer hosts who are running People Planet Pint or pastry events. It needs to be every month or every other month at most. It needs to have that consistent momentum that's being built behind it and bring people together regularly so that it has uh, that opportunity sort of groundswell. If it's just one-off training, people come to it, they have a nice time, they leave, they never think about it again. If you're meeting someone in the pub or in your local community every month, you're going to constantly be thinking about the things that you can talk to about and collaborate on and change it. It has to be that sort of yeah, momentum's the right word. I'm saying all of this because I think we're at a point now where we've tried a lot of things. We've launched about 7 different products over the past 3 years, some of which have failed, some of which have been really successful. We've tried a lot of different ways of approaching this for SMEs, but really what we have found that works is that strategic approach to bring people around a table and to bring kind of create those ongoing conversations. The approach we have with a lot of our physical materials now is around creating that better communication between teams. And that might be between teams or it might be between companies in your local area and just hosting that space for that conversation. And I think this is also where we see a lot of lack of that sustainability is often missing from the sales teams, the marketing teams, the financial teams. They're not seeing or feeling the impacts. It's only when they come around a table to talk to each other, they can then start to see the opportunities and then start to act on it. Just giving them a report to read isn't going to actually change their sort of hearts and minds at that micro level. And so, what we've tried to design now and what we're taking into next year is workshops that reapproach and shift how businesses listen and talk to each other. And part of that is actually going, do you know what? That movement we thought was just a nice to have is actually a core part of that behavior change. And it is that ownership and it's that building that kind of momentum that is really key. So I would question here of how do you do that, and that might be your team if you've got employees, or it might be that if you're a solopreneur, it's your suppliers because the suppliers are also part of your team effectively. But I think this is really about giving them space to feel heard and inviting them to these conversations and going for a coffee with them or having a chat with them and just discussing about their problems, but making sure that they feel heard and they've got the autonomy and clarity to come up with the actions that they can take themselves. Just giving someone a list of things to do rarely works. How many of you would be really happy if I turned around and gave you a list of 15 things you can do that you've got to do by next week? You're busy. You've got other things to do. It's a Friday. You're heading into the weekend. You don't want to be thinking about that. And we don't want to be overwhelming people with more things. So allowing them the space to realize that everything they do is actually has that impact and has that opportunity for positive change is really important and really hard to do. Another thing that I would always emphasize is don't talk about climate change. I know that you guys probably aren't doing this too much, which is really helpful, but it's probably a bugbear of mine within sustainability is that everyone talks about, well, what about the polar bears? Thinking back to what I said at the start, how many of you see a polar bear on your way to the shops? How many of you have seen polar bears in the past 12 months? I'm guessing, unless you live right next to a zoo or you work in the zoo, the answer is probably zero. And so just giving people um, reports to read is sort of similar to this idea of you're asking them to imagine something that they just don't really connect with. They don't see it in their daily basis. It's another thing to go and look at. So don't talk about it. Don't talk about climate change in this kind of grandiose world-saving terms because people don't connect with it. It's about how do you protect your local community or your local high street from flooding, and then how do you take action on that? Because we know that climate change is happening. We know that there's going to be increased rainfall. So what are we doing about it at that local level? And it's trying to not be too far down the doom loop of that as well, because we need to try and make it fun and compelling and bring people together to play games, to understand the solutions that they can have in their local community. That is sort of why we host it in pubs. People Planet Pint, the pint phrasing there is quite disarming. It's not, we're not saying this is a climate change meetup. It is a fun way of, and we had this at the conference I was at yesterday. People came up to us and said, well, I like two or three of those things out of the name. You know, I like people and I like pints, or I like the planet and I like people, or, you know, two out of three isn't bad. So it is that case of how do we bring people together to make this a little bit fun and disarming rather than it being super formal and scary. And as I mentioned, let people bring those solutions. So if you are trying to engage your suppliers or your team, don't go into them with loads of preconceived ideas. Set some ideas of what they can do and discuss that with them and open that space and hold that space. And I think that's really important. If you are going to networking events as well, is not going, I want three things to do or I want five things to do to leave this with. Just go with an open mind and discuss with people and see where that leads, especially if you're talking to other people who might not be as primed for this conversation. I'm very aware that, you know, there's 90 people on this call who are all coming to a sustainability talk. You're probably the sort of minority in the people who want to actually hear about this. So just let them have the space and let them be the expert in the room. They might be doing really interesting, really advanced things with sustainability already that we just need them to tell you about, and that they just need that space and that conversation to happen. And I think your role really is often in engaging with suppliers is facilitating conversations rather than doing anything too formal. And also, I think the reason why we recommend this is that it does accelerate action. And we find that then people, if they come to the solution themselves, are much more likely to feel ownership over that it's the right next step to take. And that collaboration without that'll start to happen without you needing to push it because they've come up with the idea, they'll start delivering on it, they'll start driving it forward. And rather than it being something that's being blocked and you having to chase them for, and I'm thinking here like the data collection around sustainability, it is something that will happen much more organically and you won't have to push that water uphill. So just to sort of wrap up here, I think what I would really recommend is what problems does your business already have, or what problems do your suppliers already have? So that might be sort of like an employee within your team and a challenge that they have on a daily basis. It might be what your supplier has, but don't talk to them about sustainability necessarily. Go and start talking to them about their problems and solve them with sustainable solutions. It's not about the packaging in terms of the carbon footprint of the packaging that's being wasted. It's about the fact that it's slowing the staff down in terms of trying to just get through their day and they're drowning in all this paper cardboard or whatever it is, you know, the paper roll wrap stuff. If you can just solve their solutions with really effective, convenient solutions, it's fantastic. I joined the car club because it was easier and cheaper for me, not because it was lower carbon. And so the final thing to really think of, and I don't want to leave this on just a negative, but there is no punishment for carbon emissions going up. We've seen this recently with the surge in AI, and like Google's emissions are much higher now. Same with Microsoft, same with these people. It's not right, but we need to hold that and be practical with that and really understand that there are no punishments in the short term around increasing emissions. However, the opportunities for doing green and doing sustainability really well are massive, and therefore drive with that opportunity, not the stick. So it's the carrot, not the stick. The carrot is huge. We need to be leading with that and solving those solutions and solving their problems with sustainability solutions, sorry, rather than it being a seen as a, oh, you should stop doing carbon emissions because this. It's never going to work, that language from what we've seen. That's what I've said already. And so, yeah, that's what I was going to say is like bringing people together is so key on that because it brings people together to have hope and not to feel like they're being punished for having those carbon emissions or whatever it might be. and they get to discuss those solutions and get to discuss that success that they've had. But people like people. Most people like people, at least. So if you've got a room full of lovely smiling faces like this, it's a much warmer space to be, and it's a much more inviting space than it is if you're being chased for data on your carbon footprint, which ultimately isn't going to really change that local community. So this is what we found action really looks like, is just getting people into a room, into a pub to talk to each other, and you never know where this might go. That guy in the middle, I met up with him a couple of months ago at a PPP event, and he was saying that he's actually just hired someone that he met at an event. The person on the right here, I realized that we've done two pieces of work now with over the past couple of years as a result of meeting them at the events that we held. So it is about bringing people together and just building those relationships and networks. The link's been put into the chat. So yeah, if you do want more inspiration, I do recommend you go along to your local event and just meet other like-minded business owners like yourselves, because it's what we found that really works in driving that collaboration. And yes, thank you very much. I will now ask Anna to come back online and open up for questions.
Didn't even need to ask, Adam. I was ready. I was ready and
Perfect.
waiting.
Yes, you hadn't nodded off, which is always my main fear, you see.
No, no, no. Of course not. No, I thought that was really, really interesting, and I love it when we talk about sustainability and we talk about solutions, because I know that there are lots of people like relative, understandably nervous about sustainability, or not seeing it as an opportunity. So I think that it's really important to underline that. So do hop along to your local People Planet Pint, guys. Somebody did ask in the chat, is there a national networking for Wales that's sustainability, eco-based networking in person or online? I think there are some People Planet Pints in Wales, right?
Yeah, we've got a couple in Wales, and I think Wales is quite active in that world. And I think there are some national ones, but I'm not too sure. Because, well, I know there's some regional ones. So I know there's like a South Wales and a North Wales sort of eco meetups or climate action networks, but I'm not sure if there's a national one. So yeah, definitely have a look.
Fab. Someone else in the chat. So Tess actually asked in the Q&A, do you have any tips for more rural businesses in terms of collaborations? I live in a small village in North Devon. Our nearest town is Barnstaple. It's 6 or 7 miles away. However, I know lots of small businesses in and around the Barnstaple area.
Yeah, so I think that's where it might almost be easier to a certain extent to go and speak to them, because there's sort of less choice. And if you're like where I am in Glasgow, there's like 20 businesses near me who probably don't want to speak to each other. Whereas I think if you're a bit more rural, there's much more connection there. There's much more visibility of you to be able to go and speak to them. So I think I would just go and try and speak to them. The postcode region might be slightly larger, but yeah, just chatting to people in that rural area, there's probably more of a sense of community and needing to stick together because of that distance rather than it just being in an urban area.
I also wonder with more rural businesses that you'll often be facing the same challenges,
Yeah.
whatever they may be, even if you're wildly different sectors or whatever, you may, because of the rurality of the business, you may end up finding that you're facing the same challenges, so you can mutually support each other or have slightly different ones that you can solve together. So yeah, to think about. Sarah's asked, I think she's talking about People Planet Pint. Can we set one up for our local town?
Yes, I am just looking for the link. We are running webinars next week on how to, if you want to find out more on how they all work. Um, so that will be into the chat now.
Jackie said there's a few in South Wales, but none up north. But maybe it's time to start one up north, Jackie, and get a new People Planet Pint going. Sarah's excited about that. I don't know if there's any more questions in the chat, guys. Apologies if I've missed any. I did try and keep up, but I saw some fantastic kind of ideas earlier on in the chat when you were going through about how you guys are saving kind of waste audits and that kind of thing, and saving on waste management. I spoke to a business the other day, and I don't know if I've said this before, but he runs a fish and chip shop in Belfast, and they did a waste audit, and because they thought they were throwing quite a lot away each month, realized they were throwing away over £800 a month in waste.
I think that's just that awareness piece, right? Of, as you say, people normally think about it, but they never really quantify it. And it's just as simple as capturing that over a week and be like, right, let's just get an estimate of this.
Yeah. And then they've then been able to kind of implement strategies in order to bring that down, and not only obviously stop throwing so much away, which is kind of more sustainable, the less you throw away, but they're saving hundreds of pounds a month in their
Yeah.
business, which is fantastic.
It's just money on the table, and I think that's where, in terms of quick, easy wins to a certain extent, that's the waste is the easiest thing because you're already doing it. You're already making that process, and the more you can change that, the better. You don't need to start up a new business or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think as we talk about collaboration, we ran a sustainability networking the other day online, which was great. I don't know if anyone on this call was there. Do make yourself known if you were. But it was just fantastic to get people together. And I realized that was kind of online, so it adds a slightly different element to it. But obviously people could just dial in, and it was great. And I think there's been lots of fantastic connections based off that, which is great. So yeah.
It's just hosting those spaces. I think, personally, I much prefer in person, but I think online still has a really strong space of just having that dedicated area to go along and just meet people without having to really have any sort of impact. You never know where it's going to go from those
Yeah.
conversations, but that's the sort of value of it. It's that serendipity that's really powerful.
Totally. Sarah was there. I thought there might be
Yes.
at least be one person on this chat who on the call who was at the sustainability networking, and we'd love to offer more of those kind of as across the future, because I found it really inspirational actually to chat to so many businesses all kind of wanting to do the
Yeah.
same thing and solving similar challenges but in different ways. So yeah, just going through this call today, I was like, it's just a great way of doing things, really, isn't it? And not just
Yeah.
kind of sitting in. Please do more. I missed it. Yes, we will try our very best, Chloe, to do more. Any more questions, guys, in the chat? And if not, we can give you some time back this morning on a Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon, Friday morning still. I'm living in the future, guys. No more questions. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Adam. Really brilliant. Yes, I can. This has been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Already researching setting one up. But you've got a new planet, a People Planet pint on the go soon, Adam.
Amazing. Looking forward to seeing you soon, Sarah.
Yes, they are fantastic. So do hop along to one if you can. Obviously, the People Planet pastries as well. If pints aren't your thing, I'm more of a pastry gal these days. So one or two pastries, to be honest, three or four maybe. But anyway, thanks so much for coming, guys. Just a reminder that we are running these webinars every Monday to Friday, 11 till 12, up until Small Business Saturday. So thank you for joining us for this one. Just a reminder, if you do attend 10 or more, you will receive a free gift from us, and just ahead of Christmas. So feel free to gift it on if you're wondering what to buy someone for Christmas. You will get a free gift from us. And thank you once again for coming, and thank you again to BT Digital Skills for supporting us on this Small Business Saturday digital tour. And thanks so much, Adam. Any final words before we head off? Something profound.
I'm just very, very pleased by the connections. I think, yeah, go forward and have conversations and see where the impact comes from.
Love it. Thanks, guys. See you all soon.
Cheers. Just guys.
Bye.
Bye.